Iran has not allowed freedom for a long time. And the protests, I don't think they're trying to appease me. They're trying to get somebody to help them. We're looking at some very strong options. We'll make a determination.
If I were you, Mr. President, I would kill the leadership that are killing the people. You've got to end this.
We should not be threatening military might. I mean, this is really sort of, I feel like we're coming to the worst of American imperialism again, where it's about greed and power.
Well, President Trump is being presented options when it comes to Iran. Just before this show started, he went to Truth Social and said this. Effective immediately, any country doing business with the Islamic Republic of Iran will pay a tariff of 25% on any and all business being done with the United States of America. This order is final and conclusive. Thank you for your attention to the matter. The question is, how much support will the U.S., maybe will Israel give to the protests on the ground? Let's bring in our panel. Roger Zakheim, Washington Director of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute, Politico White House Bureau Chief Dasha Burns, and Tom Bevan, Real Clear Politics co-founder and president. Dasha, you get the sense that tomorrow is kind of a day where something's going to either be decided or at least presented to the president when it comes to Iran.
Well, look, Iran is one of the areas where the president has been seen as kind of a hawk. He really sees Iran as the key reason for so much of the instability in the Middle East. The options that he's going to look at and what he decides here are going to be critical, though, because, Brett, it's one thing to execute a strike on a nuclear facility. It's another thing to talk about the possibility of boots on the ground to support protesters. Now, hawks like Lindsey Graham might be on board with that, but the more isolationist MAGA base is going to need to be really pulled along to help them understand why the U.S. is getting involved in this way in the Middle East. Again, a very different scenario than Venezuela, where they made the argument that this is in our backyard, this is about oil, it's about the economy, and so much more, Brett.
Yeah, you're exactly right about America First and the perception that it's somehow isolationist. If anything, this administration, Roger, has been interventionalist. Here's Senator Sheehy on the reaction to the left to what's happening on the ground in Iran.
The silence is deafening. It's amazing that this is getting no coverage. I mean, you'll have wall-to-wall coverage of a handful of old gray-haired, liberals protesting with signs on any street corner in America. Yet now we have millions of youth in Iran. Finally, what appears to be destabilizing a 46-year regime of terror, murder in one of the Middle East's most impactful nations, and it's getting little to no coverage.
Well, it's getting coverage here, obviously. Roger, your thoughts overall, big picture?
I think what's happening here is quite consequential for the Trump administration because this is the moment where President Trump has used the word freedom. Not a word part of his lexicon you hear often. So when he says it, it's going to mean something. And the military options are far from this binary choice of doing nothing or boots on the ground. I would expect to see cyber operations being considered and targeted strikes against the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, which is the arm of the regime that is the most repressive and oppressive and involved in trying to suppress the people seeking their freedom in Iran. President Trump has an opportunity here to depart from the failed Biden and Obama policy of negotiating with the regime over the nuclear weapons program that they push forward. That program is now being wrapped around the necks of the regime. It's the noose in which the people of Iran want to hang on this regime.
Tom, what about what Dasha's mentioning about kind of the split in the Republican Party, or at least the political potential of that concern over some of these actions in other countries instead of focusing here at home?
Well, absolutely. There is this schism within the Republican Party, within the MAGA base, and to the extent that Trump has, I mean, you played the clip of Lindsey Graham. I mean, he's more excited than he's been since 2003. He wants to go take down Cuba. I mean, he's got a whole list of places that he wants to go. That is not where a lot of the MAGA base is. But this is an interesting case. I mean, this is something we've seen this movie a number of times, most notably in 2009, but even since then, and it's never ended well for the protesters. And for Trump to try and negotiate, this seems like a stalling tactic by the regime because this does seem different this time. Over 500 locations across all 31 provinces, and so this is the moment. Donald Trump could do something here that could change geopolitics forever in the Middle East if he's able to to somehow help the protesters overthrow this regime, it would be a serious part of his legacy.
Yeah, and we don't know the fallout, Dasha, on the changing the dynamic in the Western Hemisphere with already what has happened in Venezuela. But so far, it seems like the regime in place is listening intently to what President Trump wants and wants to do.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And you had that meeting of oil executives last week. This is very much how the administration has been wanting to see things move forward in Venezuela. But everyone is aware that there's a lot of uncertainty going forward. And that's why there's been such a heavy hand from the administration in people like Marco Rubio, like the energy executives. This is something that the administration wants to make sure it doesn't fall apart. For all the reasons that we talked about here, Brett.
Yeah. All right. Meantime, the Justice Department going after criminally the Federal Reserve Chair, Jerome Powell, his pushback. Take a listen.
This new threat is not about my testimony last June or about the renovation of the Federal Reserve buildings. The threat of criminal charges is a consequence of the Federal Reserve setting interest rates based on our best assessment of what will serve the public, rather than following the preferences of the president.
The president telling NBC, I don't know anything about it. On Sunday, that the Justice Department subpoenas have nothing to do with interest rates. No, I wouldn't even think of doing it that way. What should pressure him is the fact that rates are far too high. That's the only pressure he's got, the president said. Roger, what do you make of all this?
Well, I think it's good the president is distancing himself from this because I think this is a problem. I follow here what chairman of the Financial Services Committee in the House of Representatives, French Hill from Arkansas, who's a real expert, respected across the aisle on financial services and oversight of the Fed. He's known the chair for a long time, deals with him. He disagrees with him over policy. But he said, quote, this is an unnecessary distraction today in his press statement. He said this action can undermine this and future administration's ability to make sound monetary decisions here. And my view is that criminal charges, really threatens the independence of the Fed. If the administration wants to challenge the Fed, they can do so by going ahead and bringing a case against the constitutionality of the Fed Independence Act. But don't go ahead and use the organs of criminal justice system to bully policymakers. Yeah,
Dasha, you wrote a piece about this. It seems like there may be another motive here.
There is a lot of frustration, Brett, inside the White House over this. What I'm told by my sources is that most of the senior advisors to the president in the West Wing were caught off guard by this. Nobody knew until they read the news on the alerts on their phone. And most people feel that this was not the right approach here. Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, had a plan for the succession. Jerome Powell was supposed to leave in May. Now there's concern that he may not. In fact, give up that seat. So this has complicated everything. And again, right now, to the point you were making earlier, Brett, everyone was looking forward to in the White House, talking about the economy, talking about the tax cuts that people might potentially feel in Q1 and Q2. And instead, the headlines are about potential Fed problems. And that's not what the White House wants.
Right. Yeah. He'd have to leave the chair, but he could stay on the board. But maybe not. We'll see. We're going to follow it all. Panel, thanks.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.